The hangar smelled of salt and floor polish. Morning light poured through the high windows and caught on the dented wing of the old fighter. Its paint was flaked, the markings foreign, the metal scarred but whole. The placard beneath it read simply, "Recovered Truk Lagoon, 1944. People drifted in from the parking lot, coffee in hand, whispering the way they did at funerals. A child pointed at the crooked propeller. His mother tugged him back. Someone muttered, "Looks wrong sittin' here on Memorial Weekend." At the far side of the hangar, Mayor Pruitt wiped his brow and glanced toward the press table. This exhibit, he said to no one in particular, it might look unpatriotic. Edward Hayes stood a few paces behind him, a gray-haired caretaker in a pressed work shirt. He had been sweeping the hangar floor before the crowd arrived, but now he just watched the light move over the wing. From the doorway came a woman's voice. "Excuse me, Mr. Hayes, Nora Jensen, Coastal Chronicle. Mind if I ask a few questions?" He nodded, polite but wary. She lifted her recorder. "People are asking why we're displaying an enemy plane today. Of all days." Hayes looked at the aircraft as if it might answer for itself. "Sometimes," he said slowly, "what crashes still serves." Nora frowned. "That's not much of a quote." "Maybe not," he replied. "But it's true." The mayor stepped in, his smile tight. "We're considering covering it after the ceremony. Optics, you know." Hayes didn't argue. He simply rested the broom against the wall. Outside, a flag snapped in the sea wind. Inside, no one spoke. Then Nora tried again. "You were Navy right. Served on a repair tender." He gave a small nod. "A long time ago. What made you bring this here?" Hayes traced a hand along the metal skin. The reflection split across the rivet line, half shadow, half light. "Because it saved lives," he said quietly. "Ours." Nora blinked. "The enemy plane saved you." He didn't elaborate. The crowd had started to gather around a table of donuts and folded brochures. Children laughed, their voices echoing off the rafters. The mayor raised his clipboard, calling for attention, but his words blurred under the hum of conversation. Nora watched Hayes move to the rope barrier and straighten the sign again, careful with it. She noticed how the paint on the wing shimmered faintly under the skylight, red beneath the gray, like something still alive beneath ash. When the microphone squealed and silence fell, the mayor began the dedication speech. "Today we honor the courage of those who served," he said, pausing on the word honor as if testing its weight. "And we remember that freedom comes at a price." He never mentioned the plane. Hayes listened without moving. Behind him, a gull shrieked outside the hangar door, and for a breath the sound was the same pitch as a siren he had once known. When applause scattered through the crowd, Nora looked back at him. His jaw was set. His eyes were somewhere far beyond the walls. She clicked off the recorder. "There's more to this, isn't there?" He gave the faintest smile. "You'll find it, Miss Jensen. Just don't start by judging what you see." The gulls called again, circling in the sunlight. The mayor shook hands. The crowd thinned, and Hayes stood beside the battered wing, the light sliding along the metal until it reached his face. He knew what that wreck had become. By Monday morning, the council letter waited on Edward Hayes's desk, folded once and stamped with the town seal. The line at the top read, "Directive for Removal, Memorial Exhibit Hangar." He unfolded it with care, as if the paper itself might bruise. Due to public concern, it said the displayed aircraft of foreign origin must be removed before the Memorial Day service. Its presence may be misinterpreted as honor toward the enemy. He read the sentence twice, then set it down beside his coffee cup. From the open window came the faint ring of the church bell counting the hour. Beyond that he could hear gulls and the distant sound of a flag rope snapping in the wind. When he reached the hangar, Mayor Pruitt was already there, standing with two councilmen near the exhibit rope. "Nothing personal," Ed the mayor began. "Just procedure." Hayes said nothing. "You understand, right, Optics? Folks think it's wrong to have that plane sitting front and center. Makes them uneasy." One of the councilmen added, "We're just following the manual Section 12 display ethics." The mayor handed him a copy of the order. "We'll need it gone by Thursday. You can store it out at your workshop until we decide what to do." Hayes studied the paper again. The black ink looked too sharp against the white. He signed the line at the bottom slow and neat. Then he folded the sheet in half and slid it into his pocket. No one noticed how tightly his hand stayed closed. WWII. That afternoon the hangar was empty but for the hum of the old ceiling fan. Hayes loosened the ropes around the display and lowered the tarp. The wing metal caught the light again, gleaming as if remembering something. He whispered, "You've been grounded before, haven't you?" His voice disappeared into the rafters. He pulled the heavy tarp over the fuselage and felt the weight settle against his shoulders. When Nora Jensen came by later, the hangar doors were open. She found him sweeping. "They're taking it down," she asked. He nodded. "Whose idea was that protocol?" "Protocol?" He gave a faint, humorless smile. "I've been slammed by it before. Not anger, just regulation. It hits the same." Nora tilted her head. "You really think a plane can offend people?" "Not the plane," he said. "The memory." He gathered his broom, locked the doors, and started walking toward the edge of town. She followed. "You're not going to fight them?" He shrugged. "Fighting's what built it. Maybe silence will save it." Hayes's workshop sat behind his small house near the marsh. Inside, everything smelled of oil and cedar. The single window looked west toward the ocean. On the workbench sat a set of tin boxes, an old radio, and a coil of copper wire. A photograph of young men in flight suits leaned against a jar of screws. "Mind if I look around?" Nora asked. "Go ahead." She brushed dust from a corner of canvas. Underneath, something metallic glimmered. The same curved paneling, the same faint insignia ghosted beneath sanded paint. "This is part of it," she said. He nodded. "I kept a piece when we brought it home. Couldn't throw it away." "What for?" "To remember what it became." He didn't explain further. He just reached over and turned the old radio knob. A wash of static filled the room, soft and constant, like breath. The paper in his pocket crackled when he moved. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the smell of salt and rain. He pressed the folded order flat on the bench, then crumpled it slowly until it was no larger than a coin. The sound merged with the static. Nora stood in the doorway, uncertain whether to ask again. Hayes finally said, "Some things break and stay broken. Others, well, they serve a different way." She watched him smooth the metal panel as if calming an animal. The light flickered across the rivets. He'd kept quiet once before, back in 1944. Nora Jensen had learned long ago that answers hid in the quietest places. 2 days after the order to remove the plane, she found herself standing on a porch at the edge of town, holding a notebook damp from sea air. The man who opened the door was older than Hayes, thin, bright-eyed, with grease stains still under his nails. "You're looking for Ed Hayes," he said before she even spoke. "I was hoping you could tell me about him," Nora replied. "They said you served together." The man chuckled softly. "Name's Sam Delaney. We were both engineers, Pacific Theater. Haven't heard his name spoken out loud in years." He motioned her inside. The house smelled faintly of tobacco and varnish. Model planes hung from the ceiling, each one tagged with a tiny label. "You writing one of those history pieces?" he asked. "Trying to," she said. "But I don't think it's just history." Sam poured 2 mugs of coffee. "Then you'd better understand what that hunk of metal really is." Nora flipped open her notebook. "You mean the plane in the hangar?" Sam nodded, eyes narrowing at the memory. "Yeah, that one. Truk Atoll, spring of 44. You ever been to the Pacific Num? Hot enough to melt your thoughts. We were stationed near the lagoon repair unit, not combat. That morning the sky turned to smoke. Japanese fighters hit the supply yard. Everything. We had our transport's comms shack went up in flames." He tapped the table rhythmically, the sound measured like a metronome. "When it cleared, we found one plane still mostly intact. Enemy bird nose down in the sand. Bent but not burned." Nora leaned forward. "And you used it?" He gave a slow nod. "Didn't have a choice. We stripped the radio from that wreck, rewired it with spare batteries, and sent the medevac signal through it. Every other bird burned. That wreck," he paused, voice rough, "that wreck was the only way left to save our wounded." The words hung in the air, weighty and clean. He rose and pulled a tin box from the shelf, setting it down with care. Inside lay a small leather-bound logbook. The pages were stiff with age. He turned to one marked by a rusted paperclip. The entry was scrawled in fading ink, April 12, 1944, improvised radio from enemy craft. Signal confirmed. 4 men evacuated alive. Nora traced the words with her fingertip. Saved 4 men, she whispered. Sam nodded. Ed logged it himself. Command never made it official, too strange a story. But those 4 made it home. That's what mattered. The old man looked toward the window where late sunlight filtered through the blinds like ribbons. You know, he said quietly, Ed was never the same after. Didn't talk about it. Said people wouldn't understand how mercy can come dressed as an enemy. The hum of an old radio filled the silence. Its dial glowed amber, steady and warm. Nora watched the light pulse, imagining a beach half a world away, the broken fuselage, the men carrying another on a stretcher, the radio crackling through static to a ship beyond the horizon. When she closed the logbook, the sound of the radio faded with it. Sam said, "Now you know why he brought that wreck home." She nodded slowly, the truth settling like light through dust. He smiled faintly. "There's a reason we kept that wing." The hangar was fuller than anyone expected. Folding chairs scraped the concrete floor, their sound sharp beneath the hum of ceiling fans. The old fighter still sat beneath the skylight, draped half-hidden, waiting. Mayor Pruitt cleared his throat at the podium. "This town believes in respect," he began, "and sometimes respect means knowing when to remove what no longer fits our story." He gestured toward the tarp. A few people nodded, others shifted uncomfortably. Then Edward Hayes rose from the back row. He didn't look angry, only steady. "With your permission," he said, "I'd like to tell you whose story that really is." The mayor hesitated, then stepped aside. Hayes walked to the plane. His boots echoed through the hangar. He touched the tarp, and in the silence that followed, time seemed to loosen its grip. Back in '44, he said, we were mechanics on a coral strip. No runway lights, no shelter. When the raid came, it erased everything we had. Every plane burned except this one. He pulled back the tarp. The crowd gasped softly. The fuselage gleamed patched and pitted, its wing stretching like a relic of forgiveness. "We thought it was the enemy," he continued, "but inside we found a radio still intact. We rewired it, used it to call for a medevac." He paused, the weight of memory visible in his shoulders. "Every other plane burned that night," he said, voice low but clear. "The crashed enemy plane became the only way to save our own wounded." A murmur swept through the crowd, then quieted again. Out. The scene folded backward in his mind. A beach at dusk. Flames crawling across the sand, men dragging a wounded gunner through the surf while others stripped the downed aircraft for parts. "Twist the leads," young Sam Delaney shouted over the roar of fire. "If this thing sparks, we're done," Hayes's younger voice answered from the memory steady as now. "If it sparks, we've still tried." They'd bent metal with bare hands, patched wires with knife blades. The radio crackled once, then again, before bursting into static, and finally a voice. "Signal received. Hold position. Help on the way." Hayes blinked the memory back into the present. The hangar lights flickered. The ceiling fan groaned. He rested his hand against the exposed panel inside the wreck. The radio dial still sat there, its faceplate dulled to bronze. "This," he said softly, "was our bridge to mercy, built from wreckage. We kept it because it reminded us what an enemy's silence can become." Nora watched from the crowd notebook forgotten in her lap. Across the aisle, Mayor Pruitt's expression had changed. His jaw-set eyes lowered. No one clapped. No one moved. The only sound was the wind pressing through the hangar door, carrying the slow flap of the flag outside. Hayes closed the panel and stepped back. "You can take it down if you have to," he said, "but don't pretend it never saved anyone." The mayor finally looked up. "No one's taking it down," he said quietly. "Not after tonight." The light shifted again, tracing the line of the wing until it glowed almost white. Hayes turned toward the door, the air trembling with the last word he hadn't spoken aloud. "Mercy has a wingspan." By the following morning, sunlight filled the hangar again. The tarp was gone, the floor swept clean, and the air smelled faintly of polish and coffee. Someone had propped open both doors so the wind could move freely through the space. Mayor Pruitt stood near the podium reading from a sheet of notes, then slowly tore it in half. "No more removal order," he said simply. "We'll keep it if the town agrees." A murmur rippled across the rows of folding chairs. Nora Jensen steadied her camera recording faces instead of the plane. The lens caught the light glancing off the newly polished wing. The reflection of the flag outside shimmered across it like a moving memory. Hayes stood off to the side, hat in hand, saying nothing. The mayor looked toward the crowd. "Anyone wishing to speak before we vote?" A chair scraped. An older man, white hair, cane blazer, heavy with service pins, rose slowly from the front row. "My name's Robert Alden," he said, voice trembling just enough to hush the room. "I was one of those men he saved." Every sound in the hangar stopped except the flag rope clinking against the pole. He turned toward Hayes. "You don't remember me. You were too busy keeping that radio alive. But when the medevac found us, you looked up and smiled like it was nothing. Been trying to say thank you ever since." Hayes lowered his eyes. "You just did." Laughter, soft, relieved, rolled through the crowd. Nora kept filming, though her throat felt tight. The mayor cleared his throat again. "Well, that settles the question of honor," a younger veteran near the back called out. "Guess redemption does look a little rusty." The room laughed again, warmer this time. The tension that had hung for days began to lift like morning fog. Mayor Pruitt raised a hand. "Then let's make it official. All in favor of keeping the display." Hands went up across the hangar. Old hands, young ones, grease-stained, sunburned, calloused. All opposed. Silence. Only the steady hum of the fans. Pruitt nodded. "Then it stays. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder of what we owe to each other." After the crowd dispersed, Nora shut off her camera. Hayes was still near the plane, a rag in his hand polishing a spot that didn't need polishing. She stepped closer. "They finally listened," she said. He smiled faintly. "Sometimes folks just need time to hear what mercy sounds like." Outside, the late-day sun threw the flag's shadow through the open door. It crossed the metal wing slowly, red and blue, sliding over gray. Nora kept her voice low. "You think people will forget again?" "Maybe," he said. "But we'll have this to remind them." The radio on the nearby table hummed softly, catching a local station country music thin and distant. Nora glanced at her footage, then back at the plane. "You know, she said it still flies, just in a different way." Hayes chuckled, the sound quiet but genuine. "That's one way to put it." They stood in silence, the flag's shadow drifting over them both until the light changed and the music faded into static. Next Monday, they'd give the wreck its name. Memorial Day dawned clear and quiet. The sea air carried the smell of salt and cut grass as townspeople gathered once more inside the hangar. The old fighter stood at the center, its surface newly burnished, the flag above it hanging still in the warm air. Children from the local school entered in pairs, each holding a small bouquet of wildflowers. They laid them gently beneath the wing, careful not to brush the metal. A hush followed, the kind of silence that means gratitude more than grief. Sam Delaney stood beside Hayes, both in clean shirts and medals pinned straight. The two men saluted as the choir from the chapel began a soft hymn. The mayor stepped forward, pulling a cloth from the plaque mounted beneath the plane's nose. The bronze caught the morning light, from the crashed enemy plane that became the only way to save their own wounded. No one spoke. The words themselves seemed to breathe. Nora filmed from the side, the hymn threading faintly through the camera's mic. She could see Hayes's reflection in the polished wing, blurred by the metal's curves. His lips moved as if reciting the names of the men who never came back. Sam lowered his hand. "Never thought we'd see this day," he said quietly. Hayes's voice was rough but steady. "We didn't build much out there, but we built this." The mayor stepped closer. "Mr. Hayes, if you'd like to say something." Hayes shook his head. "The plaque says it all." He smiled slightly. "Let it stand." The hymn faded to silence. For a long moment, only the hum of the fans and the cry of a gull outside filled the air. Nora lowered her camera and whispered into her recorder, her voice almost reverent. "Some machines are built for war," she said, "others rebuilt for mercy." She watched as the flag's reflection slid slowly across the fuselage, red, white, and blue flowing together into silver. The light made the metal shimmer like water, like memory. Children's laughter echoed faintly from outside where the parade was beginning. Inside, the wreck remained still, dignified, complete. Sam turned to Hayes. "Think they'll remember?" Hayes glanced toward the door where sunlight poured across the floor. "If they don't, the medal will." The two veterans stood at attention one last time. Outside, the hymn, picked up again, carried on the breeze. Inside, beneath the plaque and the shadow of the flag, the words seemed to whisper back through time, "They built mercy from wreckage."